Hello everyone, this is Zeeebo and welcome to today's Pokemon TCG Pocket video. So in today's Pockets video, we're going to run through the items and trainer tier list post Mythical Island. So I'll be talking about all the trainer and item cards based on my experience as well as tournament records and giving the tier ratings for the card based on the above tiers right here. We have the meta level, which are basically cards that sees use in almost every single deck, almost every single match in terms of usage, so they are like auto must includes in your deck if you are playing almost every deck out there right now. So that's why they are meta, right? There are certain cards which are not used in every single deck, but they are so good that if let's say you're running a specific archetypes, you definitely will include the card. For example, right, Misty in this case, like Misty is only strictly used in water decks. Like it's not as useful outside of the water decks, but almost every water deck runs it, and water deck right now is pretty prominent. So like I'll classify Misty as a meta card because Misty is a card that goes into every water deck and it's a card that straight out wins you the game if you get really lucky with your coin toss. So that's why she's meta. So the next tier is a usable tier. So these are basically cards that can see use from time to time and has definitely some use in different decks, but they are not must-haves. Like they are, like I'll say, good to haves in those decks, and only those decks specifically, right? Outside of certain decks that they may be good in, they might not be that useful, so that's why they are not in the meta level. Then we have the niche category, which are cards which I feel will see some use depending on what you need against the meta, for example, in terms of the general usage. And one card I'll say for this one, like the best example would be Blue. So Blue, I'll say it's not a good card right now because it's not a card that you will splash into almost every team, but there are certain matchups where including a blue in the deck might give you an advantage. For example, like the Mewtwo EX mirror matchup, right? By reducing 10 damage, your Mewtwo EX can survive the opponent's Mewtwo EX 150 damage, and that will give you the increased chance to win in this kind of matchup. So it's a super duper niche situation, and there are a lot of situations that blue can work in, but it's just not a card that you would think of in terms of like, okay, if I were to build a deck, I want to put blue in my deck itself. So that's why it's super duper niche. So these cards will probably have like the higher upper cap in terms of skill ceiling, in terms of your deck building, depending on whether or not you are participating in the tournament side of things, because you might want to counter specific archetypes. Now next one, we have the useless card. So I put a question mark because these cards which are less used, I would say that they are useless, but more like right now there's just no way to maximize their potential, and they're probably not cards you want to include in your decks if you want to play against almost like most of the meta itself, right? So I'll use one for example, like Pokédex. So Pokédex is useless because this card has its users in a sense. It gives you information of what card is to come, but it doesn't generate you more advantage. It doesn't give you an additional draw, and it probably gives you like better information of what is to come, but you still need like 3 turns to draw into those cards. And the only good combo I can think of with Pokédex right now would probably be just Pokédex dumping and then using Chatot to draw more cards, which is not part of what the deck wants to do, right? The deck basically just want cards that you can throw, and Pokédex is just nice a card you can throw right now. So any other cards that can be thrown in the future can be used in Pokédex slot, and that's why it is a super duper like useless card. And even in certain, I'll say like combo decks, that if you get information in your top 3 cards, you might not even want Pokédex. For example, like in a Psychic deck where you have Mythical Slap right here, having Pokédex and Mythical Slap allows you to know what card you'll draw into, so that when you use Mythical Slap, you will definitely get a +1, right? So that's a combo there. But then at the same time, you can just probably filter your card enough to make a guess and then use Mythical Slap to draw into those cards. So for Pokédex, you know the order, but there's no way for you to manipulate it such that you get more advantage out of it. And then in most cases, you'll lose 1 card without doing anything. So that's why it's just not a good card. So in the same retrospect, Handscope is also a card which gives you information, but you can't do more with it. Like there's just no cards in the meta right now that allows this card to be really powerful or good enough with the additional information that you get from your own card deck as well as your opponent's hand to make this card useful. So that's why they are more useless in the meta right now. But then in the future, if there are Pokemon cards that gives you additional advantage, for example, if you know your 3 card and you can name their order, then you draw 3 for example, then Pokédex will be super broken. And then for hand scope, if you are able to look at your opponent's card and then have a way to constantly discard their card to discard their play, then that could be a good combo as well. So it's just useless question mark because they might see use depending on the future sets, but right now not that much useful. So next one we have red card. So I'm actually a pretty big fan for red card, and I do think that red card as a disruption card is really powerful. But right now there are a few decks which I think red card can definitely see use, and there are quite a few matchups where I think red cards can definitely see use. But a lot of decks right now in the meta can dump their hand really easily, leaving with only like 2 to 3 cards in hand. So when you use a red card, you might end up giving your opponent draws in those kind of situations when they have less than 3 cards, right? If they have 3 cards, it's just a 3 for 3, so you don't actually get a card advantage. In fact, you actually lose 1 card because you use a red card for your opponent to trade 3 cards for another 3 cards. So you lose that 1 card that you use, so no card advantage there. So the best time to use a red card in terms of the card advantage is when your opponent has 4 cards and then you use a red card, so they will throw back 4 cards and then draw 3 cards, so they lose 1 card at the expense of your red card itself. So it's a 1-for-1 trade there. But then even if you're able to sort of do this good trade, which I'll say like happens quite a bit if you target those decks, you don't even know what cards you are trying to wash out into your opponent's hand, and then you might actually give them a better hand instead. So that's the instability of the red card. Like, I personally think red card is, I'll say like somewhere between niche and useless, but more useless than niche right now because the deck space is so tight that you have better choices in terms of the other trainer cards or even the other item cards itself. So that's why I'll put the red card here, maybe to the niche side if in the future there are ways to sort of manipulate this card shuffling from the red card side to give you even more advantage. So right now, ideally the best time to use red card is if your opponent has 5 or more hands, right, 6 hands, after they use their Pokeball, after they use their research, you use a red card, and then there's no way for them to draw back out quickly, and then you get a massive card advantage. So that's the only time where red card is good. So that's why this card is not like useless, but it's a useless with question mark. But still, like I don't think a lot of people are running red card, and there are a lot of matchups where red card would just be a burden in your hand. So that's why he's here. And then next, out of all the different fossils, I'll actually put Dom Fossil in useless. Like, we can definitely use Fossil to block out the Sabrina plays. We can definitely use Fossil for your Chatot plays, and we can definitely use Fossils to sort of give you some advantage depending on what you want to do, right, against the different plays that I mentioned earlier or even other creative plays. But then out of the 3 fossils right now, I would actually say O Ember is useful or usable. Maybe even like niche. I'll say usable for O Ember. So like, out of all the fossils itself, I'll actually recommend O Ember more than anything else, because for Helix and Dom, first of all, yes, they are fossils that we can use to retreat. So technically, no matter which fossil you're using, if you're just using it as a tool to prevent Sabrina swaps or just maybe any plays that disrupt your bench, any of these fossil Pokemon can be used, right? But outside of that, Kabutops as well as Omastar, they're just not as useful right now. Like, there's just not a lot of decks that can fit them into the deck, and their evolution lines, I'll say Omastar might see some use, right, depending on which decks you go after. But Kabutops right now is a little bit too weak because, like, even though it has 140 HP, but then it only does 50 damage, and there are a lot of Pokemon that does more than 140 damage right now, which just brings it down really fast. Whereas at least for Omastar case, you can prevent the opponent from attacking, so at least you can stop the offense in case your opponent is able to one-shot you. So like, in terms of the values of all these fossils over here, I would like to put them as useless, because let's say if you want to use a fossil, if you're using a fossil to counter your opponent's play, any fossil work, right? But then in terms of everything else, I don't think like you want to use them unless it's a Chatot throwaway card and get more draws kind of situation. So that's why I put them here. But if let's say you want to argue that, hey, there are certain users that you can use Dom and Helix in certain decks, then yeah, you can definitely put them in the niche category. But at least based on my own opinions, I'll group them as useless, not that useful. Okay, so that's the useless, not so useful category. Now, I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah, like out of all the trainer cards, I don't think any of these trainer cards, they are useless, but Search is definitely super duper niche because it's like Raichu specifically, Raichu Electrode as well as Electabuzz, and it's only to the electric deck, and it's like those decks are not even that useful. Even like if you run Pikachu EX, you don't even need Search, although you can definitely run the Raichu variant or even the Electrode variant to give you some Search plays itself, but it's just super duper niche. That's why Search is in the niche category. Another trainer card which I think is super duper niche is Koga. So if it was in the Genetic Apex era, I think Koga is definitely usable, and I may even put Koga as meta, cause like back then Weezing and Muk is usable back then, right, as a poison carry, and then Weezing is still really good as a war right now, but there's just a lot of better war options and they are more universal compared to Weezing, for example. And another thing about the Weezing line, its retreat cost is super duper high 3 energy. And the thing is, even if you're running a Weezing right now, you can easily use Leaf to retreat the Weezing for 1 energy instead of using a Koga, which will cause you to lose all your energy itself. So like Koga's value definitely dropped quite a bit, but there are still certain decks that runs Koga, specifically those decks where you still run Weezing and maybe certain Muk decks, I guess, but it's just that it's super duper rare and it's not like the most common decks you will see around, so that's why it's in the niche category. Yeah, I actually wanted to put Blaine in the niche side, but then Blaine's actually pretty powerful in quite a few fire decks because you might want to use Ninetales or even your Rapidash to rush down. So like I kind of want to put Blaine here, but Blaine's actually really good, so that's that. For Brock's case, okay, I'll put Brock here. So the reason why Brock is in niche is that even though right now I think the Golem deck archetype is really good, like Brock basically only goes in that deck. So if you want to grade a card based on its usability, like I don't think you actually fit Brock into multiple different deck archetypes. Like, it's just one deck that I think it's strong, but then it's definitely not the most meta decks that you see running around every single day. So that's that. And then Onyx is just really weak right now, so Brock is super duper niche. Like it's like a blue thing. Like it's definitely usable. It's just that number one, it's a very specific deck case, and then number two, it's not the strongest example, so that's why it's in a niche category. Yeah, so that's that. I think in terms of the item cards, okay, Pokeflute. Pokeflute actually was one of my most excited cards because being able to draw out your opponent's discard pile for you to fill up their bench, for you to perform a series of combos like into Pidgeot EX or into Behemoth, or like just use it for maybe Volcarona, for example. It's super duper, I'll say like cheesy, very very good combo there. But then it's like I don't think people will use Pokeflute for most decks, right, in terms of usability. And in terms of Pokeflute's role in the team, there are a few conditions for Pokeflute to be good. Number one, the basic Pokemon that you bring back must be not that useful for your Pokemon. And number two, there must be an objective for you to bring back the opponent's Pokemon onto the bench with your Flute. If not, that might disrupt your Sabrina plays, or that might give your opponent an advantage or give them more choice in terms of what plays they can make. So that's why this is a card where I think it's in a balanced state, like usable in certain decks, but then like yeah, it's just a very niche card. So that's that. Not usable in every deck, you know, that's why it's not in a usable category. So that's that. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it for the niche cards. So moving on to the usable, I'm gonna put O Ember here. So if out of the 3 fossils, if I were to choose between the 3 fossils, I'll put O Ember as usable, because like O Ember can be used as a tech card, number one. Number two, you can evolve O Ember into the brand new Aerodactyl EX to seal your opponent's move. And obviously you use O Ember in an Aerodactyl EX deck. You use O Ember in a lot of fighting decks right now which features Aerodactyl EX. And also, right, you can still use the O Aerodactyl for certain cheese plays that might sound very cheesy, but might actually win you certain matchups. So it is a very, I'll say like good card all around in terms of usability. Like you can definitely use this more compared to Helix as well as Dom. So that's why it's in the usable category. Now next card, Budding Expeditioner. So Budding Expeditioner is usable with Mew only, right? It's basically like a Koga for Mew EX. But the thing is, Mew EX War is actually really legit across multiple different decks, and Mew EX as a card has a lot of potential moving forward as well. And it is a card both good as a war and also a late game card, which means that Budding Expeditioner is definitely usable as long as that deck can find a slot to use Mewtwo EX. So initially I wanted to put Expeditioner in niche, but after doing some research in terms of the tournament metas itself, Mew EX actually sees quite a bit of use across multiple different decks. So based off Limitless statistic right here, Mew EX is used in Mewtwo EX deck, it's used in the Jinx deck that I showcased a few days back, it's used as a late game in multiple different decks for the 3 energy copy opponents play, and it's a good counterplay against some of the really good late game cards like Charizard EX as well as Blastoise EX, or even those like 150, 140 damage cards itself. So Mew EX has a lot of value, which means that if your deck can fit Mew EX into the deck, Budding Expeditioner is definitely a card in the usable category. Yeah, so if Mew EX actually drops in terms of usage, then this card will definitely fall. But right now, I'll say Mew EX is pretty usable. Not like super duper meta in every deck, but definitely has many decks that we can put Mew EX into. So that's why Expeditioner is here. So Blaine is useful as well as Erika as well. So Blaine is used in Fire Rushes, still very legit. Like I think Rapidash and Ninetale Rush is still a very powerful deck type for the fire element, and obviously any fire deck that wants a little bit of rush power, I think you want to put Blaine. That plus 30 damage can surprise your opponent and sort of cause them to miscalculate their plays, which is also quite a good surprise spectre card in fire decks. So that's why I'm going to put Blaine here. Erika is mostly with the grass decks, so there is Celebi EX as a representative. Not saying that Erika's a really powerful card, but then like there's just a lot of grass decks that are running around, and I think Erika is a much better version than Potion. So since we are talking about Potion, I think Potion's also a usable card. So basically, if you're running a grass deck, you rather use Erika over Potion, right? There are certain decks that run both Erika and Potion together, and I'll say Potion is more versatile in terms of the different types of deck you can use in. But if you're running a grass deck, I think Erika is pretty much the Potion for your deck itself. So that's why usable, same thing as Potion. So Potion is not in every deck, but if let's say your deck has a slot and you want to have a good item card, I think Potion is definitely a card that you go to. And then the remaining cards itself, Slap. Nope. Slap is actually meta. Sabrina, X-Speed, Pokeball. Yeah, these few cards. Okay, so I think Potion is the last of the usable. Yeah, because I actually wanted to put X-Speed here, but I think right now Leaf and X-Speed, they are just almost in every deck. like Live is really popular because there's a whole bunch of Pokemon that's like 2 costs or more that Live can actually give you insane value in terms of the retreat cost, and X-Speed as well. Like the old energy manipulation for retreat was X-Speed, so X-Speed was literally in every deck, and then Live now is basically in every deck because of the same reason, being a lot more valuable. Another thing why Live is super duper meta is because of Draudigan as well. So a lot of decks actually run Draudigan as a simple war, which costs 2 energy, and then it will waste a lot of tempo if you put energy onto Draudigan to retreat it. So the best way to retreat Draudigan is to just Live and then bring it back and then send your carry forward once it's fully built up. So Live is super duper good almost in every single deck for the same reason that X-Speed was, and X-Speed is still really good. Like I think if let's say you're running like a really retreat heavy deck, like running both of them together, definitely a good choice. So that's why they're definitely meta. So Giovanni, okay, Giovanni used to be what I'll say a usable card, but now it's very comfortable for the meta because there's a whole bunch of Pokemon that hits for 120, 140, maybe 160, 180, where like that plus 10 damage actually gives you this one hit KO, right? One hit KO is actually really popular right now in the meta. Like from the looks of, for example, Mewtwo EX, Gyarados EX being really popular, that Giovanni plus 10 to Gyarados EX kills your opponent's Mewtwo EX, right? That plus 10 on maybe 110 damage move gives you 120, which is a OCO on Pikachu EX as well. So there's just a lot of deck archetypes that wants Giovanni in the deck for you to push for that damage for one-hit KOs on your opponent's key Pokemon for you to get a point advantage. So Giovanni is a card where the current meta just suits it really well for that one-hit KO team, for the additional damage push, that it is a meta card that sees a lot of use across multiple different decks. Although mostly Giovanni is a one-off, like in terms of the usage, but still probably a card that I think most decks runs it. Alright, so that's why it's meta. Same thing for Sabrina. Sabrina right now is less of a 2-off but a 1-off. So it's like a finisher card, sometimes used as a tempo card. So like for example, if there's certain very pesky backlines where your opponent is trying to protect with Draudigan, you just Sabrina and then snap it off, and then you might just win the game from there. So it's a very, very impactful and powerful card that you want to include in your deck almost for every single deck out there. So that's why I put Sabrina in the meta level, right? I'll say Sabrina slightly higher compared to Giovanni. I'm just going to rank the cards a little bit. I think Liv is definitely top of the meta. Oh no, actually no, Professor's Research. Okay, no, actually Liv is more impactful than Research. Because for Research case, right, you can replace Research with a Chartot Draw Engine, but there's no cards that can replace Liv fully except for maybe X-Speed. So that's why like they are really close. But then like there are a lot of decks that just run both together. So that's why I'm going to put Liv as the highest tier rating, the best one in terms of versatility. And then we have Research. Yeah, like these two, they're just really good. Like any card game that has a draw 2 is just insane to give you card advantage. So like that's why Research is, if let's say there's no Chartot Draw Engine, Research is definitely in front. To be honest, even if I were to put Research in front, I think Research is still worthy of that position. So that's that. And then we have the last two, Pokeball as well as Slap. So Pokeball is a universal search engine to draw out all your basic Pokemon, draw into your Mewtwo EX, draw into your pre-evolutions, draw into your combo piece, draw out your useless cards so that you can get your key cards more easily, making it a really good +1 in most cases, unless your basic Pokemon are exhausted. So that's that. But most decks run Pokeball, right? The only few decks that don't run Pokeball is maybe the decks where you only have one basic lines, and you don't actually need Pokeball to search out the Pokemon as much. But then in every other deck, you run a Pokeball in the deck to just search out your basics. So that's why this is a meta card. And then Misty, I talked about it. Almost every water deck runs Misty. So outside of water deck, maybe not as useful, but just her power level in that one deck and having the ability to give you the win if you get really lucky on your coin toss is just game breaking. So the last card, Mythical Slap. Mythical Slap is definitely meta. Okay, so the reason why I say Slap is meta is because Mythical Slap single-handedly boosted the consistency of Mewtwo EX by a great notch and gives a lot of Psychic deck that consistency in terms of their draw. Any card that gives you a +1 is really good, and Mythical Slap not only does that, right, in terms of giving you a +1, but let's say if that's not a card that is there's something that you want, like in most cases in a Psychic deck, let's say if you don't draw into your Pokemon like your Gardevoirs or maybe like your Haunter to evolve, or maybe you don't get your Mewtwo EX itself, which is unlikely because you can just use Pokeball to search your Mewtwo EX, but there are a lot of Psychic decks where there's a lot of evolution line where Mythical Slap single-handedly helps with that consistency because you draw into your Psychic Pokemon more consistently, and that's where you actually win more over losing compared to the previous Genetics Apex season. And on top of that, I think Slap is a card that also gives you information. So if the card is not a Pokemon, right, you actually bring it to the bottom of your deck. So if you don't shuffle your deck, that card will remain at the bottom and you will know, okay, this card is not going to come to my hand. And if you are somebody that do card counting, it is actually an insanely good card to give you information, because now maybe that card, if it's a useful card, they'll be like, okay, if I lose this useful card, how do I do my play? If it's a less useful card, okay, it's fine. It goes to the bottom, perfectly fine. I can draw into my more useful card next. So it is a very good filtering card as well. So that's why I'm giving Slap the meta level treatment or the meta level rating for this tier list. So yep, that's pretty much it. My very own trainer and item tier list post Mythical Island. So I do hope to do this sort of tier list after every major expansion update to see how these trainer cards as well as item cards change in terms of their usability for the season itself. Thank you very much for tuning in. Do remember to like and subscribe to see more, and I'll see you guys again in my next PTCG Pocket video. Bye guys!